G'day and welcome to another coffee club. Rebecca's stood us up again this week, so it's just Eric and me again. And we managed to dodge talking about portfolio management for a whole conversation last week, but I suspect we will not dodge it again this week. Eric, what were your highlights this week?
First, I don't know if Rebecca would accept the stood us up language because I believe she's having fun with family and has her priorities straight. But that's just my point of view.
Well,
Um,
it was a cute photo from Disneyland.
it was a really cute photo. But my highlights, as opposed to Rebecca's highlights, are one is I love it when a plan comes together. Um, did my second draft for the Safe Summer Berlin talk, and like my style that I believed was what I wanted of writing a Decker grid and then building a storyboard and like not going into slides till I was able to like essentially give the talk voice only first actually worked. And that's the second or third time I've done it that way that it's actually worked, as opposed to I wanted to believe it would work and then I just ended up building all the slides and then adjusting the talk track to fit. So I'm thinking there's something actually here about figuring out the impact you want to have and then iterating in a low fidelity environment before you build something. So that might be a topic for later today. The other, more personal highlights, just really appreciating, this is kind of personal professional, but several days, like probably 3 or 4 days this week, I found really good flow and just digging the feeling that brings and like accomplishing goals. It's not really about outputs. It's about like feeling like I'm achieving the things I want to achieve at the time I want to do them, and like losing myself in the work and having fun doing so is some one I don't always get to experience. So that's been pretty nice. Yeah. What about you, Mark?
Well, we've definitely got some similar highlights. I had quite a few periods of flow this week where 4 hours just completely disappeared. If I start with personal, personal was having daughter sat me down thing for the weekend, getting out for a spectacular paddle on the bay on Sunday night, and beautiful sunset that was over by the time we got back to shore. But we looked at it, and I was like, phone out, so photo for Eric. Um, but finalizing second draft for the Berlin Summer. Uh, if I picked a moment of highlight, it was hitting the save and submit button at 2 a.m. in the morning. Uh,
That's generally where 2 a.m. is.
um, living the old life of any deadline that was close of business Friday, mentally translated to open business Monday in my development days, the old invisible weekend. But probably a slightly different experience to the Deca grid you had, because I originally put it together with Deca grid, and it was a fun experience that you helped me through in terms of understanding how the Deca grid was meant to work. And then in the time since the Deca grid, of course, I read Slidology, and then I'd bought Resonate, and Rebecca had said, "Hey, Resonate's this amazing book and great stuff on the art of storytelling, and I like it much better than Deca grids." And I'd looked at it and gone, "I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to read it," because I had my Deca grid, and that told me the talk was done. And then when we got together a few weeks ago to compare decks and talk through sort of the linkages between them and the different focus areas, that discussion when I looked at the talks together, and that was an interesting experience. First time I've been through a path of going multiple presenters at a conference, interweaving topics, gave me the piece where it was like, well, a third of my talk is gone. That means I'm going to recut it. I know, I'll go and read Resonate. So the thing that I set myself up with, and you know me too well. Uh, so I set
It
myself
wasn't
into
that
talk
so
mode.
much as thinking about what happened when I read Resonate and Slideology, and then happened again when I reread Slideology.
So I kicked off my deck writing process by disappearing to my favorite coffee shop in Oakley and uh, reading Resonate cover to cover, and then making the deck. And so it was a little different process to yours. It wound up being I had a skeleton that I'd thought through the Resonate lens, and then as the deck emerged, it tweaked and tuned. I lost some stuff I thought I was going to talk about because I found some stuff that I should. So it was a fun process.
Can you say that last sentence again? I think you lost me there. You lost some stuff because you found some stuff because you lost some stuff. You've lost some stuff
Well,
because you found some stuff.
I lost some stuff which I thought I was going to talk about, but it was because I found some stuff that was more important to put in it,
Hmm,
and it was that
okay.
that trade off of how much of the story do you want to tell? Yeah, like
Hmm.
here's the 50 things you really should do. Well, it wasn't quite 50. Um, narrowing down to these that are really important.
It's really interesting taking a backlog and time box view on what you get to cover in a talk.
Yeah.
It's like I can have two big stories, or I can have 8 little stories. But if I get the 8 little stories, I don't get to go into any of them that deeply, and they're just going to kind of be check the box stories. But if I tell the big story, it'll be meaningful, but I may not make the points I want. Sounds like product management.
I think of it like facilitation time boxing. You have an agenda and you have a plan, and then you have a moment, and you decide to sit in the moment because it's a great conversation. And then your mental wiring says, okay, we're choosing this, therefore we have to give that. Um,
Yeah, first you sit in the moment, then you dance in the moment a little bit later. Yeah, that metaphor of dancing in the moment is one that has always struck me for facilitation and coaching. I, I heard it in facilitation first from Jean and in coaching first from Lisa. So, and I don't know which one was first. But I think I enjoy it too much. I've been told.
As opposed to tap dancing in the moment.
Kind of the same thing. Your dance style is not relevant. You may choose how you dance. Some facilitators, it's kind of like they're doing thrash metal in the moment, but that's not as necessarily as comfortable for their participants.
I, I I can't picture facilitation thrash metal in the moment as being a positive thing.
No, no, it's kind of what it feels like when the agenda is being forced through. Like,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, you're in the agenda mosh pit now. We're gonna move you.
well, I've certainly been through a couple of those. It's always weird. I'm assuming you've been through these as well, where you are working with a client and they have session, another consultancy, somebody else is facilitating. They brought them in, professional facilitator,
Mm.
and you're asked to come as an attendant.
Hmm.
And it's like, Mark, we want you there because we want your voice. And somebody else is facilitating, which is free to be present with your voice. And then you sit and you watch and struggle. It's like,
You ever have a moment where you have simultaneously have like 6 flashbacks at once?
uh, yeah.
'Cause that's what just happened when you said another consultancy is facilitating.
And the thing that kills me most, and boy, I've been through this a few times there, is they have an agenda and they are going to use the time boxes to a T regardless. And I've been through a number of these now. They're usually full day leadership team workshop things. And you look at the agenda and you go, no, that's never going to happen.
Mhm.
And then they open a time box for some activity that should reasonably produce something that's going to flow into the next activity. They get to the end of the time box. No one's anywhere near the end of it. and they're like, now it's time to move and switch you into the next activity.
Which
And
which to be clear depends on the outputs from the previous one.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just to be clear,
yep.
it's not an exercise; it's an activity.
And you just watch people and the discomfort they go through. It's like we just started to engage with this. Their brains are working and forcing us to switch, and then the next doesn't work because it didn't have the output. Facilitator is going
Mhm.
to march you through.
In some ways, I would actually prefer that over other variations of the same. I'm judgy as a participant situations. I think that's a fair description of this meta category. Is I'm judgy as a facilitated participant.
Yes.
Um, where the outcomeless exercises.
Oh, yeah.
So there's the excessive time boxing, but I think the worst is the we're not getting anywhere type exercises. We're here to have you think about DevOps and imagine what it might be like if you had DevOps for an hour, but there's nowhere, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's one where I wish it was like, yeah, can we have time box that to 12 minutes, please? Because
Yeah.
the three executives in the room, they checked out, and the power dynamics are all shifting to the two operators over here in the corner. And you're about to lose all of your sponsorship, which is fine for me, but not healthy for the company that I'm supporting.
Yep.
But all I can do is text my executive that message and decide if they want to do anything. They can decide if they want to do anything with it.
Yeah.
So mhm. I don't
There
think
we
we were
go.
going to talk about other people's facilitation as our plan today,
That that was definitely an unplanned topic, but
because I've got more. Let me do a positive one. I actually have a positive example of that too.
far away.
And it was the first time I got. It was a different take on team facilitation than I'd ever had the opportunity to experience working with Gene or working at Rally. And it was a executive strategy design thinking workshop, if I remember correctly. And it was an outside team, and they charged a fairly exorbitant price, like probably 4x, 5x what I had ever contemplated charging for a facilitated event. But they brought an A team, and it was like like a lead and two senior facilitators and two assistants. And the assistants weren't there to help facilitate. The assistants were there to help with data capture, clean it up, put it in slides, and print it using the set of printers they brought to redistribute for the next exercise almost in real time.
I like
And like watching some of these dynamics work, I mean, the outcomes weren't phenomenal. They didn't like change the course of the company. They did bring some interesting, meaningful thought, and I could see echoes of the workshop later. So I would call it a success. Um, but watching the professionalism with which they executed as a team was actually quite enlightening and inspiring to me. Like, oh, do I want to bring a color laser printer? Do I want to charge enough that I can have a color laser delivered the day before to the facilitation location so that I can use it to do this kind of professional cycling and bring kind of level wise, I'm picturing like an experienced mid-level scrum master to who understands the concepts and the direction to collect, polish, and publish, and somewhere between scrum master and team support, team ops lead, admin, somewhere in that kind of space between the roles, um, and create like, yeah, here's our next. Now we're moving into the next activity, and here's your professional prompts with the data that we just summarized from the previous activity just before break. Wow, that felt kind of awesome to be a part of, and I can see a huge role for that kind of facilitation. Finding the team that's willing to do that's an interesting challenge, but that like because I don't want to necessarily like pay a top tier coach to be that assistant,
it. Yeah.
but it created a whole different dynamic on what a facilitated event could be
That's I'm jealous by reflection.
that you didn't get to be there, that you don't have a whole army of supporters like a large consultancy does.
Well, it's an interesting that that notion of because I've done a lot of pair facilitation and like doing vision canvases, for example, where I love with a vision canvas starting with A0 print out of the canvas on the wall, but then actually not creating directly onto the canvas, and having a deliberate structured set of facilitated activities where you go through each cell on the canvas and facilitate something, figure out what's going to go in that cell, which is usually, when I do it with a pair, two whiteboards. There's the whiteboard that I'm facilitating the current slice on, and the whiteboard that the last slice was on, and
Hmm.
then the pairs transcribing the last slice onto the canvas uh, as you go.
There's
So
kind of like the output canvas, and then there's the working spaces.
yeah,
Oh, that sounds kind of cool.
look, it's nice because you get your canvas. I started doing this an awful lot with art vision workshops, and it's nice that as the workshop goes by, you can keep looking back and go, "There's our canvas coming to life in actual canvas form," but without the constraint that I see a lot of people try and populate direct onto a canvas and wind up with a canvas that's a mess.
Hmm. No, I can't. I've done variations of that, but I don't think I've ever done it quite so explicitly, and I kind of like it. That's a nice one.
I I've always enjoyed doing those workshops. I think the one that I really enjoy is when you do your vision statement or your elevator pitch, because I divide the room in two and go each write a pitch, and then you play back the elevator pitches to each other at the end. And like, okay, which is better? And pick a pitch, and then you go, okay, what was brought out in the other pitch that didn't come out in this pitch? And you wind up doing an augmentation process. You get a lovely elevator pitch out of it, but it's also huge. Um, Straight onto the canvas, pitch done live in the workshop. Good fun. So, facilitation. Get stuck there for a while.
Hmm. And my hand heads actively in facilitation just a little bit because of something coming up Friday. So also interesting, fun things.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm never very far out of it. But do you want to go back to talking about the talks again for a little bit?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go over there.
So, I mean, it was a really interesting experience for me on multiple fronts doing this talk, because there was the piece where, you know, interleave talks, and actually some, in the back of your head, this is where I'm linking here. This is what, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to somebody else. But actually, I can borrow a concept they created and come back and reinforce it. Um, so there was a thread running there, but then there was the other thread running, which was, the conversations we had during our Shaping Portfolio Agility podcast recording, and the way that they had, weirdly enough, we'd created visual metaphors while recording the podcast, and they'd really stuck with me. So that was quite a fun process. That was very handy being able to steal images. I do.
I appreciate that. There are some fun new ones. I'm gonna keep this to an audio, like talking heads format. I think instead of trying to start sharing slides right now, but it was a lot of fun. Like I will say, having our new template to work from gave me a nice baseline to not have to think through. It's like the enabling container, enabling constraint format, and then having a newfound comfort with Photoshop enabled me to do things very quickly that I used to like copy paste and then overlay a bunch of things colored the same way it colors my background to trim, and like the hackery I used to do versus pop it open, toss a couple layers on, add a magic wand, do a overlay effect, paste, done. Export layers.
Yeah.
Like, ooh. And I was just reflecting on the enablement of, I won't call it mastery because I'm by no means to mastery in Photoshop, but like things that used to take me an hour of figuring out how to do a basic thing, I now just do. Chelsea was proofing a sign that she's getting made and carved out of wood for the studio downstairs last night, and she get the studio she's working with sent it over. The people that would actually be doing the wood cut sent over this thing, and she's like, "Oh, I don't quite like it. I'm not sure how to explain it." I'm like, "Here, just bring it over here." And we tossed in Photoshop, and I'm moving layers around. And, like in real time, I'm able to manipulate things, and like the fluency to reshape it in front of her and then generate 3 or 4 options as layers and export it quickly. Like that just wasn't there a year ago. And I can see its influence in my talks now. It's like, boom. Like this actually looks like it was an original graphic as opposed to a hacked together patched piece of something.
Yes, I think I'd opened Photoshop twice in my life as of a year ago. Because, you know, I think mental models, I'm not a graphical person, therefore Photoshop's not a tool for me. I had it because kids like to use it, but I reckon I spent more time in Photoshop, and I think you were even better at your past hack than I was. 'Cause I think the only hack I used prop. I've got,
That
I
was I remember the
yeah.
crop days. The magic in Photoshop was set transparency color for me.
Uh, yeah, I'd done that a couple of times, and usually it was 2 years between times, and I would madly try and remember the last time I'd Googled to figure out how to do a set transparency background.
I remember there was a year, couple of years, and honestly, probably a 5-year period where I joked. It was kind of right after I became an agile coach, coming out of being an architect, that I joked about how PowerPoint was my primary dev tool. And I actually got pretty good with PowerPoint, but then watching the morph shenanigans you've been getting up to is like changed my perspective on it. And the amount of learning and like YouTubing you've done to like come up to speed and see new ways of working on this is kind of inspiring as well. So
It's been a journey.
yeah, so I think this and the OBS. It's kind of a right back at you. Like the way of collaborating around some of this stuff
Yeah,
has been just very different than anything I've done. I've been very much a solo presentation creator, solo coach in a lot of ways because road warrior consultant, and even when I had a rally tribe behind me, we didn't actually get the chance to work together on stuff as much as we would have loved to.
yeah,
It's interesting co-creating, and then like this idea I was kind of bubbling to Chelsea as we walked last night. The way the talks are building on each other, and like that we have 3 or 4 talks in an arc. That there's a clear trajectory through these things is
yeah,
kind of awesome.
yeah,
Like I don't think we've ever considered really doing it before, much less having done it.
yeah, yeah. It's a fascinating experience. And
And the good.
no, you go.
Well, and I was just thinking in the pickup on it. I'm wondering if that'll actually be part of the explicit process for DC now.
Well, I've found myself thinking about that over the weekend. I'm like, ooh, what's what's the connection thread for DC?
Well, not just on our side, but I'm wondering if that'll be something on the organizer side that we see as a sanctioned, like expected thing now.
That's going to make their whole process a little bit more complicated.
It's okay. It's a new revisited process this time around anyway, so they're
Oh, this
agile.
is true.
They'll figure it out. I've heard agile teams know how to pivot and simplify. I'm not sure I've seen that, but
I think my favorite pieces, like the portfolio ecosystem visuals that you end up doodling during one of our podcast recordings.
oh,
Um,
the orange arcs and circles and stuff.
well, literally just that, the imaginary organization. That's let me summarize it like this. And I believe this was like a forced creativity thing that's happened. The number of times that we sit in a conversation and go, how do I tell this story without breaking confidentiality? And you sit there in that moment and you're like, hmm, I can edit out this detail and I can abstract away that detail until eventually you've got the real life war story that you can tell, and you can tell it safely. And then we had that moment during the podcast recording where you went, wouldn't it be cool if we just had a model to manage an organization and we could build it as a bit of a melange of various places that we've worked and use it
Mhm.
as an anchor for stories. And then you built it. We at the time we were talking about the relationship between the portfolio examples and investment zones. And so you had this picture, and it's like, oh, there's a realistic picture of an enterprise. 10 or 12 top level portfolios in logical clusters. And then you took it another level and you went, it needs a name. And joked around with RBW and then went to ChatGPT. I laughed my head off when I ChatGPT. Variations of Royal Bank of the World and really big widgets and
I started with Royal Bank of the World as my made up name, by the way.
yeah,
I started out with that. And then I'm like, but I want it to be cross industry. I don't want it to just be a bank. I need it to be insurance and manufacturing and all these other ones. And ChatGPT to the rescue.
yeah. So at this point, you've got a sample imaginary company. You got a portfolio ecosystem for it. And then you go a little bit further and it's like, oh, you've got the whole cast of players that you built in Dali. And so we've got the standard imagery for the
Mhm.
team variation, RTE, executive. Now we've got a whole embedded organization to tell stories about. That's awesome. So
I'm
thank you.
really, think you're welcome. I'm also getting a chance to do a little bit of world building. I think of that as world building
Yeah.
um, for a client right now. And it's really fun coming up with scenarios and like as I think about all of the different things I've had a chance to build into courses and context and the case study type stuff I've built over the years, the ones where I can actually feel a little bit the mission and the purpose of the fake organization
Mhm.
are the ones that are the most fun.
Yeah.
And like having TTC back in the architecture course made like all the examples for me as a creator much more real. And for students, I get mixed opinions. Like, oh, it's too complex, and I have a little bit of back channel in my head. Like, are you an architect? Do we have an architect, bro? um, but at the same time, it is a lot for to absorb in a 5 minute. But once you get to know it, especially when it transcends across things, it starts to be real. And like when I story tell, when I introduce lessons, when I do things with it, it's much more real for the students.
Yeah.
So I was actually reflecting earlier today as I was thinking like how I want to do more world building, create more opportunities and experiences and situations. So
And we're building up a library of assets that will help us do it.
mhm. um, I haven't played with it yet. I'm going to say this, and you're going to go play with it before I get a chance to, because that's how things work around here. Um, but I through one of my AI newsletters today, this thing called Lore Machine came through, and it's to transform story text into multimedia adventures, and it will like build a comic strip for you. So I'm actually going to give it the visual style of our art and see if I can get it to tell me, build me a quick comic or two. Don't know what I'm going to use it for, but I'm going to try it.
Oh, why not? Curiosity. See where it goes.
hmm And they give me 100 free credits or some number that means something. And whoops, I did not mean to kick that on loud. Apparently, they have a lot of audio on that, but some cool stuff like people building interesting comics with it.
Right.
So I'll see if it how close it can get to our style.
Yeah. No, the back of my head all the way through this process, and I shudder as I say it, but I've been shuddering as I think it, but I know I'm going to do it. The Lean Portfolio Management Boot Camp I built last year.
hmm
I know is, well, originally I was like, it's going to be a recut of the slides, a new slide styling. And I've now come to the realization.
hmm
Uh, but, and I started back of the brain processing on elements of what was going to happen. But I can now picture building like a TTC, like complete RBW backstory setting for it.
or adopting one.
Well, create, adopt, merge, obfuscate. but it's that more you think through that lens of world building, through the lens of I can now find a way to tell real stories that I could never tell before because I've buried them deeply enough in disguise that they're truth.
I tell clients or I tell students at classes and clients too. It's like I will tell stories, and the stories are all true stories, but they're all combinations of different companies. Some of the stories may be from your employer. Some of them you will think are from your employer, even though they're not. Those are the true ones for you.
I I definitely have a there's the evil side of me comes out sometimes. I see a group and you know they're in the training room and I know about some stupid stuff there. And I'll be on some topic and I'll go, let me illustrate something that people commonly get wrong.
Hmm.
And it's like, here's a story, and it's not about your organization. And you tell a story, and they all just look at each other, see themselves.
Hmm.
It's one of my favorite plotting.
Ronica Roth, she was CSD and one of my old Elevate co-founders, does an activity socially that she calls Story Portal, where
Mhm.
it's a prompted story activity with a big fun wheel to spin to give you the prompt and some cool stuff. And I have a deck of cards somewhere that is the lightweight, easy to travel version of it. But one of the things when she was first telling me about that, and we were talking about storytelling in general, she said that I really loved is many stories are true, some of them are even factual,
That
and
sounds very Veronica.
that truth and fact actually speak to different things. And I think when teaching and sharing and storytelling, for me, it's more about truth than it is about fact. Although wildly wrong facts bother me, and sometimes I'm very glad I don't make them up. Very because I I had an opportunity over a it was probably a 10-year span between two visits to this company. I did work for a company way back when I was at EMC as an architect, and then revisited that same company um, in a one day leading safe style executive overview type thing 10 years later. And I was telling a story about how the project I was building had a higher cost of delay. I was using this is an illustration of cost of delay and how once upon a time the media platform that I was helping build actually took raised floor space away from another project because the cost of day was significantly higher than mine, and the other one was just 130 grand a month. And so, even though they were done, the next window to get additional raised floor space wasn't going to come around for another year due to issues. Let's just say because of issues, we all had those historical issues, and they decided just to take that opening in the schedule and put our app on it instead. And I'm telling the story in the middle of this one day leading safe, and there's another person who's currently a safe fellow that was in the room. That's kind of my sponsor and being he was earlier in his career then, and we're talking and sharing, and one of the ladies in the room raises her hand, and she's at the level now where she could just kill the entire thing,
Yeah.
and she's like, "Was that here?" And I'm like, "Yes," and she's like, "I was sponsoring that other project,"
Ah!
and she named the project that I was on as a consultant,
Yeah.
and she's like, "And it was absolutely the right decision, but boy was I pissed in the moment." And this is where I learned, like, make sure there's enough basis in fact of any of your stories if they're at all related to the company you're in. But I've never had one boomerang 10 years later like that.
Ah, that's glorious. So speaking of stories, morning is a short stream because we're about to need to jump on a conversation with the fourth member of our story arc for Berlin to test the theories about whether, certainly for me, the plans that I have to go, you should go to talk, see this, uh, are actually going to hold true. So
Yeah.
we're going to wrap it
Oh,
up fast today,
mhm.
but
Did we just get to 0 out of our 4 topics and successfully avoid LPM?
all we did too. Success. Welcome to the coffee club.
Yeah.
All right, folks. We will see you next week.